Sterling dropped the cardboard box onto the mahogany desk. "Pack your things, Clara. The vote is final." He adjusted his silk tie, attempting to hide a smirk. Her father's leather chair still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco. Now, the new chairman occupied it. 3 weeks after Arthur Vance's funeral, the board of Vance Global had voted to liquidate $50 billion of generational wealth, dismantled in a 15-minute meeting. "You have no legal right to mandate a fire sale," Clara stated, keeping her voice entirely flat. "The trust stipulates a mandatory hold." "The trust," the chairman replied, tapping a heavily redacted legal document, "had a restructuring clause in the event of catastrophic market failure. We recognized such a failure this morning." Fiona, another board member, stood by the door, avoiding eye contact. They were selling the entire infrastructure to an anonymous shell corporation for mere pennies on the dollar. It made zero financial sense unless the board was profiting from the destruction. Clara picked up a single silver pen from the desk. She knew exactly what they were doing equals, she just didn't know she was watching. Clara suppresses her grief, letting cold, calculating anger take the wheel as she observes their blatant theft. She turned her back on the men who stole her inheritance, already calculating the exact cost of their ruin. Love seeing arrogant bullies get absolutely ruined? Hit subscribe so you never miss a payback. Now, let's watch Clara spring the trap. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clara's flat. Her dining table was buried under stacks of printed corporate filings. She traced the buyer's name with a yellow highlighter, Vanguard Horizon Ltd. The chairman had convinced the board to sell Vance Global's core assets for a pitiful $200 million, a company worth $50 billion. He argued it was the only way to avoid absolute bankruptcy. Clara pulled up the offshore registry for Vanguard Horizon. Hidden behind a labyrinth of proxy directors, the structure was sloppy. It took her less than 3 hours to find the link. Sterling wasn't just selling to a random buyer. He was selling to a syndicate that promised him and Fiona a 70% kickback once the assets were chopped up and sold to competitors. They were burning her father's life work to the ground just to roast their own marshmallows over the flames. She dialed Elias, her father's retired legal counsel. He answered on the second ring. "They did it," Clara said into the receiver. "They authorized the sale." Elias sighed heavily. "Then we need to stop the ink from drying." The fog of mystery clears, revealing a betrayal so deep it shifts Clara's mission from preservation to utter destruction. Clara stared at the offshore registry, realizing a much more brutal strategy was required. Elias slid a manila folder across the booth at the quiet diner. The chairman found a loophole in the Cayman Trust. By claiming the firm's algorithmic trading branch was compromised, he triggered a panic clause. Clara opened the folder. The signatures of 8 board members stared back at her. All bought and paid for. They are executing the transfer to Vanguard Horizon on Friday. Once the funds clear, Vance Global ceases to exist. Clara traced her father's forged signature on a prior addendum. He had built this empire from a single desk in a damp basement. Now, a group of empty suits was stripping it for parts. "Can we get an injunction?" Clara asked. Elias shook his head. "By the time a judge looks at this, Vanguard Horizon will have dissolved the assets. The money will be scattered across 50 different offshore accounts. Sterling gets his kickback, and you get left with a bankrupt shell." Clara closed the folder. The legal route was a dead end. Fighting them in court would only give them time to hide the money. She needed to let them execute their flawless plan. The realization that the law cannot save her forces Clara to embrace a sharper, riskier path. If they wanted to sell her father's legacy to a phantom, she would make sure that phantom had teeth. Clara logged into a secure terminal. She didn't need to fight Vanguard Horizon. She needed to become them. Her mother, before passing away a decade ago, had established an ironclad sovereign wealth fund in Singapore, entirely separate from Vance Global. It contained exactly $250 million in liquid capital, enough to meet the board's insulting asking price. Clara tapped the keyboard, initiating a digital conversation with the proxy directors of Vanguard Horizon. The syndicate behind the shell company was notoriously ruthless, but they were also incredibly greedy. They wanted Vance Global for $200 million, expecting a fast $50 billion return. But they lacked the immediate liquidity to close by Friday. Clara offered them a bridge loan, heavily disguised through a labyrinth of shell companies, with a single catch: she controlled the purchasing entity until the loan was repaid. The syndicate, blinded by the prospect of billions, accepted the terms. They thought they were using a desperate private lender. Clara poured herself a glass of water. She just bought the gun they were pointing at her own head. Fear is entirely replaced by the sharp, focused adrenaline of setting a massive financial trap. The digital ink dried on the proxy agreement, putting Clara's hand directly on the trigger. Sterling strut-timed into the Vance Global lobby like a conquering king. Clara stood by the security desk, holding a small cardboard box of her final belongings. The chairman paused, flashing a brilliant, empty smile. "Clearing out the last of it, Clara? Good. The new owners will want a clean slate." "You have no idea what you're doing," she replied, keeping her expression perfectly defeated. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I am saving this company from your father's outdated ideals. Vanguard Horizon is wiring the funds tomorrow morning. By noon, I'll be the executive liquidator. You get nothing." He laughed, a dry, grating sound. Fiona walked past, refusing to look at Clara. The board was terrified, but their greed overpowered their guilt. The chairman walked toward the private elevators, fully believing he had orchestrated the greatest corporate heist of the decade. Clara walked out the glass doors into the chilly morning air. She needed him to feel invincible. Arrogance was the only thing blinding him to the fatal flaw in his perfect contract. The bitter sting of public humiliation masks a deep, secret satisfaction as the villain walks. His triumphant laughter echoed in the lobby, exactly as Clara had planned. Clara sat in Elias's dimly lit office. The old lawyer reviewed the proxy agreement. "You are playing a very dangerous game," he murmured, adjusting his spectacles. "If the chairman realizes Vanguard Horizon's ownership structure has shifted, he will pull the plug on the sale." "He won't look," Clara said, leaning back in the leather chair. "He is too focused on his back-end payout. The syndicate promised him $50 million deposited directly into a Swiss account the moment the assets transfer." Elias tapped the desk. "And when he realizes the syndicate no longer controls the purchasing entity? He won't realize it until it's too late." Clara checked her watch. 24 hours remained. She had to ensure the chairman's personal bank details were locked into the transfer protocol. If she could prove he intended to receive stolen funds, he wouldn't just lose his position. He would lose his freedom. Her laptop pinged. A secure message from his executive assistant, a woman Clara had helped out of a severe debt crisis years ago. The assistant had delivered the final piece of the puzzle. The tension escalates as Clara secures the final, damning evidence, shifting from defense to offense. The attached file contained the chairman's offshore routing numbers, sealing his fate in black and white. Thursday morning brought a suffocating quiet to the financial district. Clara sat in a rented office space across the street from Vance Global. Through binoculars, she watched the boardroom windows. The chairman was pacing, gesturing wildly as he spoke to the rest of the board. They were voting on the final authorization. Her laptop screen displayed the escrow account. Vanguard Horizon was required to deposit $200 million by 10 a.m. It was currently 9:55 a.m. Clara's finger hovered over the enter key. If she authorized the wire, she was draining her mother's entire legacy to buy a stolen company. If she failed, she lost everything. If she succeeded, she bought a $50 billion empire for pennies. She watched the executive slam his fist on the table in victory. The vote was unanimous. The board had officially sanctioned the theft. Clara didn't hesitate equals, she pressed enter. The screen buffered for 3 agonizing seconds. A green checkmark appeared. Funds transferred. Across the street, the chairman raised a glass of champagne. The ultimate leap of faith triggers a massive rush of adrenaline. There is no going back now. He drank to his massive success, completely unaware he had just swallowed a mouthful of glass. Inside the Vance Global boardroom, the mood was euphoric. Sterling checked his tablet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice thick with satisfaction. The wire from Vanguard Horizon has cleared. $200 million. Vance Global is officially under new management. The board members exhaled collectively. Fiona wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. They had done it. The greatest fire sale in corporate history was complete. The executive immediately pulled up his private banking app on his phone, waiting for his personal $50 million kickback to register. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. He stepped out into the hallway, dialing the syndicate's liaison. The company transfer is complete, he hissed into the phone. Where is my back-end payment? The voice on the other end sounded confused. We didn't fund the escrow. Our bridge lender exercised a total buyout clause at the final hour. We don't own Vanguard Horizon anymore. The chairman gripped the phone tightly. The blood drained from his face. Who owns it? He demanded. The intoxicating high of victory crashes into a wall of icy paranoia as the plan begins to unravel. We don't know, the liaison replied, before the line clicked completely dead. The panicked executive rushed back into the boardroom. Something is wrong, he snapped. Fiona looked up from her laptop. I just got logged out of the internal server. Try again, he ordered, pulling out his own executive keycard. He swiped it at the secure server terminal in the corner of the room. A red light flashed. Access denied. Panic began to ripple through the room. Board members frantically tapped at their phones and laptops. Every single one of them was locked out. The new owner of Vanguard Horizon was moving with terrifying speed. Call IT, the chairman shouted, his voice cracking. Tell them to shut down the external firewall. The door to the boardroom opened. The head of security walked in, flanked by two large men in suits. I'm sorry, sir, the security chief said, his face entirely unreadable. But I cannot do that. I've received direct orders from the new majority shareholder. Sterling stared at him, his chest heaving. Who gave you that order? The absolute loss of control strips the villain of his power, reducing him to a panicked, cornered rat. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung wide open to answer his question. Clara walked into the room. She wore a sharp, tailored black suit, her expression carved from ice. The board members stared at her in utter confusion. Clara? Fiona whispered, her voice shaking. What are you doing here? Security. Escort her out. The security chief didn't move an inch. The ousted chairman let out a forced, hysterical chuckle. This is pathetic, Clara. Throwing a tantrum won't change the fact that you lost. Vanguard Horizon owns this building now. Clara walked to the head of the long mahogany table. She picked up the champagne bottle the executive had opened earlier and poured the remaining liquid into a nearby potted plant. You are entirely correct. Vanguard Horizon does own this building. They own the servers, the intellectual property, the subsidiary accounts, and every single chair in this room. She pulled a thick, leather-bound folder from her briefcase and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud equals. She slid it directly in front of him. The balance of power violently shifts, establishing Clara as the undisputed predator in the room. I suggest you read the articles of incorporation, Clara said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. The chairman opened the folder with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the documents, searching for a loophole, an error, anything to save him. He found none. The sole director, primary shareholder, and absolute owner of Vanguard Horizon was listed in bold ink. Clara Vance. Fiona let out a strangled gasp, dropping her phone onto the carpet. You, he choked out, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. You authorized the check? $200 million, Clara replied smoothly, leaning her hands on the table. For a $50 billion empire. It was the bargain of a lifetime. Thank you for facilitating such a cost-effective acquisition. The rest of the board erupted into panicked whispers. They had sold out Arthur Vance's legacy, intending to steal the profits, only to hand the entire kingdom back to his daughter for pocket change. The executive slammed the folder shut. This is fraud. You used a shell company to deceive the board. Clara smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that reached her eyes. The psychological devastation of the villain hits its peak as he realizes his greed was his own executioner. I used your shell company. And that brings us to the matter of your kickback. Clara pressed a button on a small remote in her hand. The massive presentation screen at the back of the boardroom blinked to life. It displayed a high-resolution image of a wire transfer mandate. It detailed $50 million scheduled to move from a Vanguard Horizon subsidiary to a private account in Geneva. The account belonged to the managing director. Corporate espionage, embezzlement, and intent to defraud, Clara listed, her tone almost conversational. You convince this board to sell a perfectly healthy company at a catastrophic loss, purely to collect a $50 million bribe from the shadows. The board members turned on him instantly. Fiona stood up, pointing a trembling finger. You told us it was a necessary restructuring. You never mentioned a personal payout. Shut up. Sterling roared, backing away from the table. It's a fake. She fabricated that document. Clara didn't raise her voice equals, she didn't need to. She possessed absolute authority. She looked at the security chief, nodding once. The alliance of thieves shatters completely, turning them against each other in desperate self-preservation. The security chief stepped aside, revealing two uniformed police officers waiting in the hallway. The police officers stepped into the boardroom. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of ruined lives. Mr. Sterling, the lead officer said, producing a pair of steel handcuffs. You are under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The executive backed into the floor-to-ceiling window, looking like a trapped animal. He looked at Clara, his arrogance entirely shattered, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. Clara, please. Your father, Arthur, and I were friends. We built this together. My father built this, Clara corrected him, her voice echoing in the large room. You were just a parasite feeding on the edges. And now, you are being removed. The officers grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back. The sharp click of the handcuffs sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He struggled weakly, his tailored suit wrinkling, his dignity completely stripped away. The board members watched in horrified fascination as the man who promised them millions was dragged toward the door. A deep, satisfying purge of the villain's toxicity leaves a profound sense of justice in its wake. Clara watched him struggle, feeling an incredible sense of lightness replacing the grief in her chest. With the former chairman gone, Clara turned her attention to the remaining board members. They were sweating, pale, and entirely at her mercy. Fiona clasped her hands together in a pleading gesture. Clara, we were misled. He lied to us. We can work together. We can help you transition the company back. Clara picked up her father's silver pen from the table. She examined it under the harsh boardroom lights. There is no transition, Fiona. You voted for a fire sale. You signed the termination of your own contracts. She tossed a stack of envelopes onto the mahogany wood. These are your severance packages. Standard minimum. Security will escort you to your desks to collect your personal items. You have 15 minutes to vacate my building. A collective groan of despair filled the room. Decades of unearned corporate luxury, gone in 60 seconds. They had tried to steal an empire, and in doing so, handed the rightful heir the legal right to fire them all. The absolute, ruthless cleansing of the remaining rot reinforces Clara's transformation into a formidable leader. The boardroom slowly emptied, leaving Clara alone in the silence she had fought so fiercely to secure. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light across the empty boardroom. Clara walked over to her father's leather chair. It had been thoroughly sanitized of the former director's presence. She sat down. The leather was cool and familiar. On the desk, the silver pen gleamed. The company was whole again, entirely untethered from the parasitic board that had dragged it down for years. By forcing their hand, she hadn't just saved Vance Global, she had legally acquired total, unquestionable control. No more board votes. No more compromises. The $50 billion empire was hers, bought and paid for with a fraction of its worth, using the very greed of those who sought to destroy it. Her phone buzzed. It was Elias. Is it done? He asked. Clara looked out the massive window, watching the police car carrying her rival disappear into the city traffic. She leaned back in her father's chair, a genuine smile finally touching her lips. The heavy burden of grief and vengeance finally dissolves into profound peace and emotional freedom. "It's done, Elias," she replied softly. "Equals the house is clean."